Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating framework called Beyond the First Paycheck, the 70-30 Energy Law, and the True Purpose of Work. And honestly, this completely flips the script on how we view our careers, literally starting from the very first moment we get compensated for our effort. It really challenges us to look way beyond the numbers in our bank account and discover a much deeper, almost hidden framework for personal and professional growth.
So, what should you do with your first paycheck? It's a super fun, kind of nostalgic question that almost everyone entering the workforce asks themselves. Remember that feeling? You finally crossed the finish line of your formal education, landed a job, and suddenly, boom, you have a sum of money that feels entirely yours. The immediate instinct is usually to figure out how to spend it, right? And historically, society has actually had some very specific traditions regarding this exact moment.
Looking at this shift, it's actually really interesting to see how the gifts themselves have evolved, while the underlying why is exactly the same. In the past, it was this huge tradition to buy your parents' red thermal underwear with that first paycheck. Today, well, maybe it's a high-end cosmetic set, a nice dinner out, or even a designer handbag. The physical item has definitely upgraded with the times, for sure. But we really have to ask ourselves, are we actually trying to pay our parents back for all the money they spent raising us? Because let's be real, a single handbag certainly doesn't cover decades of sacrifice.
The core message here is beautifully clear. Taking care of your parents, mentors, or siblings with that first check is simply a way to build a solid foundation of gratitude and trust as you step out into the world. It's absolutely not a financial transaction, it's an emotional expression. You're basically signaling to your community that you appreciate the support system that got you to the starting line. By reaching out and showing that gratitude in your first 1 to 3 years in the workforce, you're laying down this positive energy that will literally support your entire future path.
So, this whole first paycheck tradition, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. The source material hits us with a quote that completely challenges why we even show up to work. If you enter the workforce believing your primary goal is simply to secure a salary, you are immediately placing a ceiling on your own potential. The paycheck is necessary, obviously, but it's actually secondary to the true purpose of why you are there.
And that brings us to this absolutely paradigm-shifting concept called society study, or Jungbub in Korean. It's the idea that your job is actually a continuation of your education in the real world. Think about it. If you aren't using your job to study society, to understand the wildly diverse people around you, and to learn how to harmonize with different environments, you're completely missing the true purpose of your career. Without this continuous, real-world study, you'll just never become a truly competent, fully equipped person.
Well, this perfectly illustrates the core framework of today's explainer, the 70-30 Energy Law. To really wrap our heads around why society study is such a game changer, we have to look at how human competence is actually built. There's this universal rule governing our education and our entry into the professional world, and it dictates that our required knowledge is divided into two very distinct phases. Here's the harsh reality. Even with a prestigious university degree, you only enter the workforce with 70% of the required knowledge and energy. It's just a firm fact. Everything you learned in school, all those late nights cramming, all those grueling exams, that was only your basic education. It represents just half the actual study needed for life, capping out at exactly 70% of your total required energy. You know, you might walk in on day one feeling totally prepared, diploma in hand, ready to conquer the world. But that remaining 30%, you can only absorb that through real, messy, boots-on-the-ground interactions. The 70% foundation gives you the tools, sure, but it absolutely cannot teach you the nuances of human behavior, the crazy complexities of workplace dynamics, or how to handle unpredictable crises. If you try to operate in the real world running on just that 70%, you are inevitably going to make mistakes. Let's put this into perspective with a great analogy from the source material, the university professor. We usually think of a newly hired professor as the absolute peak of academic achievement, right? Like they've made it. But according to this law, on day one, even they are only at 70%. They're entering the lecture hall not just to teach, but to complete their own field study. Over the next few years, they meet students who challenge them, who ask bizarre questions the professor never anticipated. If the professor actively listens, records those observations, and adapts, they gradually absorb that final 30% to become a true master of their craft. Because the professor isn't just standing there to lecture at people, they are there to fill their own 30% gap by watching where their students struggle. Students generally lack the same level of academic training, meaning their raw, totally unfiltered questions will perfectly expose the professor's blind spots. By carefully and earnestly addressing these unexpected challenges from their students, the professor's own incomplete education is finally made whole.
But what happens if you arrogantly believe you're already at 100%? This brings us to a massive warning sign about the dangers of stopping your education the second you get hired. What happens if that professor, or, you in your new job, walks in with an inflated ego? What if you look at your degree and just arrogantly assume you have nothing left to learn from the people around you? Well, there is a very specific, almost inevitable downfall for this kind of mindset.
Look, if you just sit back at your desk and stop learning, the environment has a funny way of throwing challenges at you that perfectly expose your 30% gap. When you first enter society, the tasks given to you are usually pretty easy, perfectly manageable with your 70% foundational knowledge. But as time passes, 1 year, 2 years down the line, the environment naturally escalates. You're handed slightly harder problems and slightly more difficult people. Eventually, you will be confronted by someone or something that matches or even exceeds your exact skill level. And man, the negative effects of this arrogance snowball so fast. When an arrogant person hits that wall, they get completely stumped. Because they haven't been actively learning, they can't solve the problem. So what do? They resort to shortcuts, or Jungbub in Korean. They start blaming others, complaining things like, students these days just ask weird questions. But the harsh truth? They just lack the skill to teach them. This inevitably leads to career stagnation, and eventually the environment will literally force them out of their position. Basically, arrogance acts like a physical shield, blocking out all new information. The moment you puff up your chest and rely solely on your degree, your growth completely stops. The second you act like you have it all figured out, your education ends. And in a rapidly moving society, if you aren't actively moving forward and absorbing that final 30%, you are instantly falling behind. No two ways about it. So what's the fix? Well, it's the ultimate takeaway of this whole explainer: genuine humility. But hold on, let's redefine humility for a second. It is not just about having good manners or bowing politely to your boss. Humility is the essential, strategic posture required to absorb the final 30% of your societal education. It's an active state of being open, observant, and genuinely ready to learn from every single person you interact with, totally regardless of their status. There is this incredibly profound quote from the source to remember here. When you enter society, be extremely humble until you are 100% equipped. This means when you open the doors to society, whether you're a fresh graduate or hold a PhD, you must lower your head. You have to acknowledge that you are missing 30% of what it takes to succeed. And trust that society, through its challenges, its people, and its environments, is uniquely designed to fill that exact gap for you. But the catch? It only works if you remain humble enough to actually receive it.
Let's put these two mindsets side by side for a second to see why this is so absolutely vital. On one hand, you have the arrogant worker. They view their job as just a paycheck, rely entirely on past credentials, and ultimately hit a painful wall of stagnation, resorting to those messy shortcuts to survive. Now compare that to the humble learner. They view every single day as society study, constantly upgrading their skills to easily adapt to escalating challenges. They ultimately reach 100% mastery and emerge as true, unshakable leaders.
And honestly, the most beautiful part of this whole philosophy is that true masters don't have to fake humility. Once you've humbly absorbed that final 30% and achieved 100% mastery, humility just radiates naturally from your absolute competence. It's like only the ignorant feel the need to puff out their chests. Those who are truly equipped and have reached the level of genuine leadership carry a quiet, unshakable humility that just commands absolute respect. So I want to leave you with this final, kind of provocative thought to chew on next time you clock in. Look around. That difficult client, the unexpected problem, the messy team dynamic, these aren't just random annoyances standing in the way of your paycheck. They are the exact curriculum perfectly designed to teach you your missing 30%. So ask yourself, are you just working for a paycheck, or are you finally finishing your education?